Happy Thursday, friends. Welcome back to Share Your Story with Ellie. I'm your host, Ellie B, and I'm really thankful you're choosing to spend your time with me. Today, I've got my old friend, Mac Macon, on the podcast. And yes, you'll recognize that name because he is Susie Britt Macon's son. Our families spent so much time together, especially over the holidays, which you'll hear us reminisce on. And so many of my memories growing up center around the Macons. Mac mentions it on the show, but his friends used to call him Mother Goose because he was always telling captivating and truly hysterical stories. That nickname definitely still rings true today. Thanks to a little nudge from his sweet fiancé Schuyler, Mac reached out to me a few weeks ago about wanting to share his story with self-abuse, specifically his struggle with alcoholism. Hearing his honesty about the battles he's fought against alcoholism and drug abuse, his clarity after hitting rock bottom, and ultimately his generosity to share his story with sobriety in order to help other people is truly inspiring. In part one of our conversation, Mac offers the raw details of the circumstances that led to his alcohol dependence, as well as the gritty stories of what's gotten him to this point. I'm honored he would choose to share his story with me and so many others, and I know it is both of our prayer that so many more people will be set free from the bondage of self-harm. Without further delay, here's part one of my conversation with Mac Macon. Mac Macon, it has been far too long. I
100%.
am so excited you're here, but the second that we talked about doing this, I got to admit the first thing that came to mind was all of the holidays we spent together that I don't know that people would know about us.
That and
and
watching my mom and I reenact movies.
yes, yes, it's like a one-sided charades. Like no one's really there to guess.
Nobody caught on to it, but we were having our own moment. Yeah,
for sure. And the chaos I remember most is Emily and I like trying to help out in the kitchen, but she is so like, whatever, who needs a recipe? Like, let's just throw this stuff in. You and your mom acting things out. But there's one story that sticks out to me more than most. And I don't know if this is even a story that you'll remember, but it was Easter one year. And every year your dad made ribs and we would like grill out, hang out outside. And we love to tell this story with Mary Claire because she will admit in middle school, she was just less athletic during that time. And we remember all sitting at the kids' table on the back porch and Mary Claire looking over at you, evaluating your plate and saying, "Hey, Mac, got any tots?"
I do vaguely remember that. 100%.
And we crack up about that all the time. And as a girl who is still very potato obsessed, we love to be like, "Hey, Mac, got any tots?" So that was just...
There are a lot of moments I remember about holidays. It was just random people were invited over. And mom blowing the shofar. And,
of course.
Yeah. And Emily would go off of Pinterest and completely trash the kitchen.
Yes.
So
she was great at a lot of the table decor. And then I feel like she was one of the first that was like trying to make an egg look like a bunny. Like there was a lot happening.
She would turn that whole kitchen into a industrial size kitchen. I mean, it was
an operation. Yeah. And what was so fun is we did so many of those holidays together, but that was also like a Friday night for a while. Like we would be over just hanging, friends coming in and out, but
100%.
The charades and the shofar usually present.
Oh yeah.
And what could be better than that?
Mom would make us gather around.
Yep.
I don't know if there's a proper way of blowing a shofar or not, but just to go off topic, but I mean, like, whenever somebody blows a shofar, I get completely wigged out because you hear it in movies and it sounds so perfect.
Yeah.
And then when they blow it, it's kind of just like nails on a chalkboard. You're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like,
the
stop.
ceremony of it all, special. Don't
Yeah.
think we're quite nailing the note.
It's like somebody telling you they know how to play the trumpet. No,
No, they probably don't.
don't.
They
Don't do
probably
it.
don't. Well, I'm so excited to have you here. And I would love, just before we get started, if you can tell people who you are, where you live in, what's up with you.
Okay. Mac Macon is the name. Susan Britt's my mom. Living in Charlotte, North Carolina right now.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. How much more do you want to know?
Engaged.
Yes, so I am engaged to Schuyler Hamilton, which is actually funny, which we met on one of these modern day apps, let's put it that way. But we met each other and we started sharing our stories with each other, like our background, our names.
Yeah.
So my name is James Madison Macon the Sixth.
Yes.
Which, I think you know the history, but James Madison never had kids, the third president of the United States, but he married my great grandmother. And when he died, she lived in the plantation, Shirley, married, obviously, my great grandfather. And then they started a new line of Macons.
Yeah.
And they started using the name James Madison. And when I told her that, she's actually a direct descendant of Alexander Hamilton.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so, like, they have a whole bunch of furniture of his, like,
That
all
is so
sorts
wild.
of really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And those two did tons of historical things together.
No kidding.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's,
Wait, that's so cool.
Yeah. We always jokingly talked about this is going to be like one of those, weddings that's going to be posted and it's going to sound like it's a royal ordeal. But in all reality, it's just going to be a very small, intimate wedding with like 50 people if they decide to show up. So, yeah.
Wait,
anyway.
But that, I feel like that's not common to be able to know that much history. And I think clearly means there's history in store for the both of you, whatever that looks like. But that kind of collaboration.
I mean, just as long as we just don't follow the, generation that we have right now and just ruin history,
Very
but
fair.
we're good there. Yeah. As long as we keep teaching our kids the actual history, but
yes.
Yeah. That'd be really cool.
That's so true. Well, your sweet fiance has been such a supporter of me and this podcast from the beginning. And I'm not
going to lie, I love you to death. I really do, but I cannot do podcasts in a car.
Listen.
And she makes me listen to those things.
Well, then I thank her for it, and we need to meet and hang out immediately.
I just want to sleep when I drive to a podcast.
Listen, it's just the dulcet tones, it's lulling you to sleep. We'll leave it at that. But she was really kind of the person who encouraged you also. Like, I think this is the place to share your stories. So walk me back. Like, what was that first conversation like? What made you really want to say, like, I think I have something to share?
I've been thinking about that question for such a long time. First off, just to kind of kick it off in a fun way, I don't know if you ever knew this, but jokingly, my nickname growing up was Mother Goose.
Yes.
By all of my good buddies, because I told way too many stories. And so, I mean, Schuyler's been through, everything with me. She's been terrific. She's been probably the best partner I could ever ask for. She's been overly gracious, completely humble in everything that's been going on, and completely understanding of it. And just that alone just shows how much love she has for me.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since I became comfortable to finally tell her, some things going on with me.
Yeah.
I've kind of gradually become more and more comfortable to share some stories with her, and we laugh about them to this day.
Yeah.
But I always tell her fun stories, stupid things I've done, and we laugh about it, childhood memories, crazy things that have happened. We'll see something that goes on, and then she'll make a joke about it and be like, "Bet you've been there before," and I'm like, "Shut up." And we'll talk about that and whatnot, but I always talk about them, and sometimes she'll tell me, "Mac, you've already told me this story before," and I'm like, "Oh," which is what
Covered.
everybody used to say to me, which is why my name was Mother Goose. So, anyway, but I first off too have been to 3 rehabs. One of them I jokingly call, Schuyler and I laugh about it. I jokingly call boarding school, because I got my high school diploma there. So when people asked me where I was at, I was super embarrassed. I was like, boarding school, and they were like, "Oh, military school." I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
So anyway, while I was there, yeah, obviously in the beginning of a rehab, things like that, you're always looking for uplifting things. You're always looking
Yeah.
for, something to grab onto. And one of the big things about the programs that I went to were Christian programs. And
Yeah.
so you don't have a cell phone, you don't have contact with society,
Yeah.
you don't have contact with your family. You're allowed to write letters to immediate family only. You're not allowed to call them. You're not allowed to do any of that kind of stuff. You're basically just, you're in somewhere.
Right.
And reading books, which I hated reading. I
Yeah.
absolutely hated reading. But I would find books that I was interested in, and honestly, I would start off with reading like secular books, like war books,
Yeah.
and I loved those. But then I started finding books about people who would share their story, and I have read all sorts of books. From people battling cancer, from people battling addiction, from
Yeah.
people going through terrible, terrible things, like all the way up to watching, their loved one die
Right.
next to them in a car crash or something.
Yeah.
Um, and it always moves me. So obviously it moved me, but I always kept reading these books, and it's like nothing really clicked with me though,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyway, just kept reading and reading, and it's like I was chasing a fantasy. It's like watching a movie, finding yourself in a movie, and you're like, oh, I wish I could be that guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I could be that Jason Bourne,
Yeah.
essentially.
Exactly.
So theoretically, I started reading Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah.
And I told you I don't want to get into politics, but that's a whole nother podcast.
A whole other podcast.
Yeah. But anyway, started reading that, and as soon as I started deep diving into it, I started realizing this guy literally was born and raised in an area where everybody had a master's degree in drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And I could totally relate. Now, the redneck part, living in hillbilly area, could not.
Right.
But just growing up around people that, really didn't have much to live for, had friends, family, people like that were all alcoholics, drug addicts. Yeah. And as I kept reading it, I was thinking to myself, I was like, you know what? I've read so many of these daggone books, and I feel like I should write a book. And I just said that out loud to Schuyler, and she was like, podcast, Ellie. And I was like,
thank you, Schuyler.
It's like, no, that's Ellie interviews like chicks. Like,
fair.
They gossip about, their charcuterie board, And so I was just like, I'm not gonna do that. And she was like, well, don't deep dive into trying to write a book and just do something way out there. Start small.
Yeah.
Which is interesting too, because I have become friends with a guy here in Charlotte. and he plays professional football. And we jokingly talked about me starting my own hunting thing, like freelancing,
Yeah.
taking people out hunting
Yeah. Yeah.
and guiding them with the dogs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I jokingly made the comment to him one day. I was like, "How about you send some of those football players my way?" And he was like, "Start small, do something fun." And then he was like, "Reach out to people in AA or people going through recovery." And he
Yeah.
was like, "That right there is what you would probably have more fun with." And what
Right.
I realized is my mindset for the longest time was just like, I get an idea and I try and come up with like this Fortune 500 business idea,
Yeah.
and I try and just lay it all out. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, heck yeah, I can do this, 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 this." And then it's like, okay, yeah, where are we going to get the financial funds to
Yep.
start this?
Yep.
And it stresses me out and it freaks me out, which is
And then you
part of the
freeze.
reason. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, technically speaking, I didn't freeze back in the day.
Yeah.
I acted in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
Now when he said that to me, it kind of hurt my feelings actually. But I really meditated on that. I really thought
Yeah.
about it, prayed about it. I talked to Schuyler about it, and I was like, for my whole life, I've literally sat there and I've always tried to come up with this, genius idea of just trying to, I don't know, start something
Yeah.
and just make it become this big thing overnight. When in
Right.
all reality, I just need to start small.
Mm.
And, you know,
Yeah, that's I
one little
can
step.
totally be that way. And I think I forget who said it, but I started listening to a podcast or something, and what she kept talking about was it's really what is the next step of obedience, which I'm not good at because I want to go like
Yeah.
big picture. How do I get there? I want to be there. And really what it takes is that next step. But I actually, and that brings me to when we were talking about doing this, and you sent over that voice note, one of the things you said was one of the things of self-harm was choosing alcohol, which I thought was such an interesting and important way to
hmm
define that. But then you said was something that led me there was I didn't know what the definition of success was. And I couldn't figure out what it meant to be successful. So exactly what you're talking about when you try to go big picture, Fortune 500, all of that, and then you forget the steps to get there, then it does
Oh, yeah.
make you either freeze or choose something else. So
Suppress.
yeah.
All
So
sorts of things.
tell me, like, what were some of those initial things that you realized would set you off to continue to make choices to choose alcohol?
Oh, let's put it this way. I mean, my thing is, so the best way to probably put this is, I mean, growing up in Jacksonville, which I loved it,
Yeah.
and I want to be careful in the way that I say it too, because like I said in the beginning, reading all these stories, hearing stories, harsh stories, things like that, I always, like, here's a great example. When I was in these programs, we would go to church
Yeah.
and people would share their stories, share their testimony.
Yeah.
And you'd hear the one guy like talk about, "Oh, I started doing this and it just became a problem." And then everybody would just nod. And then you'd hear that
Mm.
one guy get up there and be like, "My dad was my best friend. He started a business. It kept the whole family afloat, blah, blah, blah. He battled cancer. He passed away." And then it was like everything was left up to me. And
Mm.
I literally just suppressed myself with, heroin and alcohol and da 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 da.
Yeah.
And I've, been hit by Narcan like 6 times, and the whole crowd was like bawling, and
Right.
everybody was just like, "Oh my gosh." And, it's the gory story. So for the longest time, I kept hearing to myself, or kept literally, I think, kind of listening to the devil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically tell me your story's not worthy.
Mm.
And, you're just a little boohoo. As I said to you I don't know if it's appropriate or not on a podcast, as I said to you on the voice note, some, middle-aged white kid, from a middle class area.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know. I guess I took advantage of Timuquana. Like, I ran up the bill at the bar,
Yeah.
like, and just acted like an idiot. But for me, though, going through St. Mark's, which I adored and loved,
Yeah.
um, I picked up quickly a lot of kids already their plans, their lives already set out for them.
Mm.
And I'll never forget, it's so embarrassing. Um, when I was graduating the sixth grade from St. Mark's,
Yeah.
our teachers came up to us and handed us a note card and said, write down what you want to be when you grow up. And I
Mm.
just was like, what? And,
Yeah.
and they just said, oh, it's not anything tricky. It's not anything bad. Like, this is just like a fun activity. We're all about to graduate. We don't have anything for y'all to do.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, heck yeah. So I wrote down, I want to own a hunting and fishing store. Um, and then when we went to go walk down the aisle, the stage, whatever,
Yeah.
they made us stand up on the stage and read those note cards
You're
out loud
kidding.
to the whole congregation.
Wow.
And so, of course, all these kids get up there and they're like, I want to be an attorney because my dad is. I want to be a doctor because my grandmother's battling cancer. I want to go to,
Mm.
this is right after 9/11. So a
Wow.
lot of them
Yeah.
were like, I want to go into the military after
Right.
9/11. And then, of course, myself, I get up there and I'm so embarrassed because I knew what I wrote.
Mm.
And I literally read, I want to own a hunting and fishing store. Pause. And then I was like, a big one. And like left it at that. And everybody just died laughing. And then to make it even more worse, my mom wrote in our yearbook, congratulations, you graduated from the sixth grade. Now you can live in the van down by the river from Chris Farley. Um, so yeah. Um, anyway, but with all of that being said, though, you know, I had such a simple mind. I just looked at all the fun things. Everybody else was
Yeah.
just so serious. Their parents were pushing them into bowls. They were pushing them into Episcopal. They were trying to set them up on this good path. My parents were trying to do the exact same thing, but I struggled reading and comprehending.
Mm.
Math was like Chinese to me,
Yep. Yep.
especially when I got into algebra. I don't even know if I ever got into calculus, to tell you the God's honest truth.
I definitely
Um,
didn't. So you're not alone in
yeah, so
that.
I mean, it was terrible. And
Mm.
so when I struggled with that, um, my parents kept threatening, you're going to go to public school, you're going to go to public school. And public school, by the way, in Florida is terrible compared to public school in some places like North Carolina.
Yeah.
Um, And I was like, no, I'm not going to public school. Well, then they sent me to Bishop Kenny because they had some type of a learning program place there. And I went there. I felt distant from my friends because I went to Bowles.
Yeah.
I went to, St. Mark's, and a lot of my friends were there. Nobody went to Bishop Kenny. And I hated it there.
Yeah.
And so instead of making friends, joining teams, doing things like that, I started making fake IDs. Yeah, and I was in the ninth grade when that started happening. Um, I had my first fake ID when I was in the ninth grade. It was
Mm.
terrible. It was probably about an inch thick. Um, and I legitimately stuffed it in my wallet, made sure I never pulled it out so anybody could look
Mm.
at it. Because, I mean, unless I could convince them it was like a black card or something. But like it was terrible. But that was
Mm.
my way of finding friends, and people I figured, loved hanging out with me because I
Yeah.
could buy booze and make them fake IDs or
Yeah.
things like that. And anyway, from there, it was just like more and more distant from friends, more and more distant from school, wasn't focusing, more focused on trying to find social acceptance. Um, and it just progressively got worse. And
Mm.
then my mom pulled me out of Bishop Kenny, and then I went to Lee High School.
Yeah.
And boy, was that a change.
Yeah.
And when I got there, I mean, it was like I just decided to give up on the idea of school. I
Mm.
mean, everybody else didn't care. I mean,
Right.
everybody else was like, I'm done with high school. I'm going to get my GED. At one point, I considered it.
Yeah.
And at that point, I basically was just like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to
Mm.
be. I
Yeah.
don't feel like I'm going to be successful in school. School's not for me.
Yeah.
Kids started teaching me how to skip class, um, which was hysterical because I was like 260 pounds and I couldn't hop the fence. So I'd jump on my teacher's cars and jump over the fence. So yeah. But and then I got really smart and I started bringing Chick-fil-A to school and giving it to the security guards so they could let me out the front door.
You can never say you were not creative. That is
The
for
more I
sure.
keep telling this story, I should have been in sales. But yeah, so anyway, I feel like I'm getting off track, but
No, I guess like in all of that, like what was the appeal still of alcohol? Like what?
the appeal to the alcohol is like it covered all areas that I just felt completely hopeless.
Mm.
Um, Losing my friends, like when I was young, I didn't consider myself an alcoholic. I mean, I was still
Yeah.
figuring out who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Going through Bishop Kenny bowls, things like that. Like, yeah, I was drinking and stuff like that. We were just kids. We were sneaking alcohol. We were going
Right.
to parties. We thought it was fun. We were being dumb. But by the time I got to Bishop Kenny and I was skipping school, and then I just felt like I didn't have anywhere to go.
Mm.
That's when I started hiding bottles,
Yeah.
like under my bed in my closet,
Mm.
and like would literally just drink myself and watch movies, and then try and literally. It was like movies was my getaway. Like
Yeah.
I made the comment about being that Jason Bourne
Yeah.
type person, but I mean it was like I thought that I could become somebody in a movie, but it wasn't
Mm.
reality.
Right.
Um, and so it was an easy way for me just to escape the day
Mm.
and move on to the next.
Yeah.
And then the next day just sucked. So I would start drinking again.
Yeah.
Um, and then finally I went to boarding school,
Yes.
as I call it. And that was supposed to be 18 months. I was there for 2.5 years.
Mm.
And when I got out, I lost about 163 pounds.
Wow.
And it was like a game changer for me. I felt
Yeah.
great. I was on a workout program. I had a schedule. I had a regimen. I had all these different things I was doing. I was actually successful in school. I learned how to, focus on things. And then if I
Mm.
had a hard time with things, ask questions, figure it
Yeah.
out. Don't be afraid. Da 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 da.
Right.
And those types of things worked. And then it was like when I got off to college and I got away from my parents, it was like I thought to myself, and I remember I heard this, I can't remember where I heard it from, but it was like college is a time where you get to become an adult,
Yeah.
you get to screw up, and you get
Mm.
to find out your mistakes and you get to learn from them. And it was like I took that and ran with it.
Yeah. It was a
And I
pass
was
and
like,
permission.
heck
Yeah.
yeah, I get to totally do this.
Mm.
And this is when your mom was really a part of the life of my life, actually, because my mom was ticked around that time.
Yeah.
Because I went to a place called Lee University,
Yeah.
and I think I was there for like 6 months, and I hated it. It was a Christian
Mm.
school. We had to go to church. We had to,
Yeah.
be in at a curfew, all these types of things, and I could not find a party anywhere. And I was like, this sucks. And I mean, these kids were literally like 21 years of age, and they were having parties in basements, like trying to be quiet because like the
Yeah.
teachers lived next door,
Right.
or professors, as you would call them, whatever. But I had a buddy of mine fill out an application for me, write this bomb.com paper because I sucked at that, and got me into TCC. And my grandparents had set up a college fund for me.
Yeah.
Found out I was an adult by this point, and I could call the banker and move money around myself.
Yeah.
So I called them, asked for a check, struck a check, and sent it to Tallahassee Community College. My parents showed up to pick me up for Christmas, and instead they showed up and I had all my things packed. And I told my parents I was going to Tallahassee Community College. They were livid.
Yeah.
And your mom, I remember first time my mom came to Tallahassee, your mom came with my mom.
Yeah.
And they walked the campus. And your mom helped my mom be at peace in that whole scenario. And was like, this is such a beautiful campus. It's a lovely place. Your mom with this gentle, tender voice.
Yes.
And, walking my mom through the whole process. And of course, I'm living at Southgate, which was like Animal House.
Yeah, literally.
Literally. I remember, I think my first night there, like the RA would walk around and bang on the door and be like, going on a booze run, y'all come up with a list.
Seriously, you're like,
yeah, and I was sitting there going, now I'm in college. I was so excited. And so anyway, but I mean, when I was there, I did do school. I was doing well for a while, but going back to where I did lose like 163 pounds,
yeah.
I do need to be careful how I tell this story because I don't know who listens to these.
Yeah.
But I remember I was at a party, and I remember a group of girls making the comment, who is that? And somebody said, oh, that's Mac Macon. He looked pretty good. And when I heard that, I was like, game on, girls like me. Like, I'm not fat anymore. And I was so stoked. And so when I was in college, I mean, it was like alcohol changed. I was going after girls. And then it was like, that went well for a while. But then, going after girls, getting my heart broken a few times, I would fall back into the alcohol.
Yeah.
And then it was like, all right, screw it. I'm not going to get my heart broken. So I'm just going to go to the bars and try and pick girls up that way. And regardless of whatever they think, like it's a win-win for me. I get to go to the bar, to go have fun with my buddies.
Right.
And then I just get drunk or whatever. And, I mean, chasing girls, doing that type of thing, it's a black hole.
Yeah.
I mean, it's stupid. And I literally found myself so deep to where that kind of became my degree versus going after anything else in school.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not showing up to class. I was not doing anything at all. I never could actually find a girl at Tallahassee that actually wanted to be in a relationship with me.
Yeah.
Found a bunch of lovely girls though.
Yeah.
Became friends with them, things like that, but never could find any stable relationships. And got involved with a girl that I ended up dating back when I was in high school, and nothing benefited from that at all. And so, but I put all of my identity into that. And I just figured if I find a girl, maybe my mom might be happy for me, my dad might be happy for me. I always try to get approval through that with my parents because, my mom was the type of person that was like, oh God sent me a dream last night of your future wife. And I was like, like, okay. And like, and it was like, and it would work me up. And I would always ask her, do you know who it is? Do you know who it is? Did you see her face? Like, what kind of hair did she have? Was it blonde, brunette, redhead, da, da, da. And, mom was like, I can't tell you. And I was like, oh my gosh. And, And I mean, and that was my college phase, just trying to find a
Mm.
girl and
Yeah.
to solve my issues.
Mm.
And finally, the alcohol was always there, and it was always my go-to to
Yeah.
suppress any type of feeling that I had and any
Mm.
heartbreak that I ever had. And I mean, during those years too, I mean, I was just drinking beer and I would go drink liquor here and there, and I would drink a bunch of liquor at bars and I would have fun, but I would get drunk and be stupid, and that was it.
Mm.
But the
And
more,
that's also partly like, to some degree, what people would say, college, you get drunk, you act stupid.
well, and
So
that's
what
why.
was the part that you were like, but I know this is a different level, or I know this is not, or
So
did it
that
not even
was
feel like that?
so that was primarily when I left college. I actually did a medical withdrawal.
Yeah.
So I had a seizure.
Yeah.
I got depressed. Um, I was actually choking on a bowl of cereal, and the girl I was dating showed up at my apartment, um, revived me, stuck her fingers down my throat,
Mm.
and called my teachers, told them it was during exam week, couldn't make it. I had a medical issue. They
Yeah.
basically told me that I was going to flunk. I didn't know how I was going to break the news to my parents.
Yeah.
Um, and so instead, while she was at school, I went out and bought a bottle of cheap whiskey and
Mm.
sat in a bathtub and turned on Pirates of the Caribbean, going back to where I legitimately found myself wanting to be some
Yeah.
character in a movie, and I would just laugh at Jack Sparrow.
Mm.
And I literally would sit there and think that I was kind of like a Captain Jack Sparrow, just drinking whiskey,
Mm.
or bourbon or rum, whatever,
Yeah.
out of a bottle. And I did. I just would get blackout drunk.
Mm.
And I remember that girl's mother called me and basically said, Mac, you might have a problem with alcohol. And I was like, no, you have a problem with alcohol. No. Anyway, and that's when I really started noticing that there possibly could be a problem, because I was
Mm.
drinking by myself.
Yeah.
And I was drinking with a purpose, just to get hammered and move on to the next day.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did that medical withdrawal and I went home. And when I got home, I had to figure out what to do. I had to
Yeah.
find a job. I had to do something. And I got a job, did all those types of things. And it's like I reverted back to well, can't make friends, can't find a girl, so let's
Mm.
party.
Yeah.
Let's try and find somebody through that atmosphere. And, and then that's when that just kept kicking off.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from that point, I think it's also really important what you said about identity, because I think that's the thing that we all genuinely struggle with more than anything.
Hmm.
Is that place of like, who am I? Where do I fit in?
Mm-hmm.
How am I defining myself within either this group, whether that's your job, whether that's, the friend group you're a part of, the sport that you play, the college that you're into, like, what does everything around me say that I am? But getting
Oh,
to the core
exactly.
of like, who really am I is completely different.
And that was my thing. So when I went home, I worked for some family friends who tried to help.
Yeah.
And that's why I love Jacksonville and I love the people there. It's such a tight niche group, and
Yeah.
everybody wanted to help. And can't remember his name for the life of me, but he hired me. This guy hired me, put me in a engineering company, and I was making stuff. It was line work, whatever.
Yeah.
And he pulled me off to the side and put me in his office and be like, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I would always say, "I don't know." Um, and they talked about, well, if you work your way up here, you can become this, you can become that, you can be an engineer, you can do this, da 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 da. And it all sounded great and awesome, but in all reality, I did not like what I did.
Yeah.
And I hated it. On top of that as well, I don't even know if you know this, I never got a car until I was 21.
Yeah.
And this was all probably when I was like 19,
Yeah.
20. Um, and never could figure it out. And finally, um, that girl that I was dating in college, we
Yeah.
broke up. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened.
Mm.
And so I reached out to David Bass.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, I need help and
Mm.
I need to get involved with a strong community of people. And I need to meet some good, healthy Christian people. And I'd like to get
Mm.
involved with Young Life.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget David Bass. We sat down at like Metro Diner and he was
Yeah.
like, I've got the perfect idea for you. So of course, in my mind, I'm sitting there going, heck yeah, like high schoolers get to be crazy young life leader,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And
Yeah.
then he was like, have you ever heard of Capernaum? And I was like, no. And he was like, okay, well, you're going to go to camp at Southwind.
Mm.
I was like, okay, high schoolers, heck yeah. And I show up with a bag, ready to rock and roll. And it's a whole bunch of special needs kids.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was stunned. I was
Yeah.
shocked. Like, I've got a special needs cousin, and I get really
Yeah.
awkward sometimes. I used to get really awkward around
Yeah.
him, and I freaked. And I was like, oh, David Bass, what in the world did you do to me?
Yeah.
And I get on the bus, and I mean, these kids are crying
Yeah.
and they're freaking out. You know, we're only going a couple hours away. And I just remember watching a group of kids go over to one kid that's just like snot blowing, crying.
Mm.
And they start hugging him and they're like, it's okay, it's okay. Like, you
Yeah.
know, it'll be all right. And I mean, I was like, okay, that's really sweet.
Yeah.
And then we get to camp and I won't say his name, but there was one kid there with Down syndrome. And he comes up to me and he was like, dude. I was like, yeah, what's up? And he was like, I'm so stoked. I was like, all right, me too. It's my first time.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, you don't understand. I was like, okay, well, what are we talking about? He goes,
Yeah.
I'm going to have like 5 or 6 girlfriends at this place. And there's a couple of chicks coming from Tampa. And I was like, okay, right on, man. So he starts dating this one girl. And I guess like dating to them was like if they were dating, they would hold hands.
Yeah.
And so everybody would know. I mean, they would literally like eat dinner, like hands holding and like one shoveling, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, it was hysterical. And I kind of clinged onto him to
Mm.
help me be comfortable.
Yeah.
And he found this one girl from Tampa that he absolutely loved, well, attracted to, let's say that. And she was dating this other guy. Long story short, whole thing breaks out to where he makes her feel jealous by dating this other girl.
Uh-uh.
And oh yeah, it was great. It was like watching Real Housewives. And so like drama is through the roof at this point. And so they start holding hands, and then next thing you notice, the girl that he was dating originally just started falling.
Oh.
And it was like every kid in a wheelchair, every kid on like crutches, every kid, you know, that had 2 feet that they could walk on, ran over, started hugging her, loving her,
Oh.
blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And I started bawling.
Yeah.
And I was just sitting there like, oh my gosh. And that was like the first time I felt like God was just sitting there going, it is so simple. I'm just trying to show you that I love you. And through
Wow.
these kids, like, you know, it's real. And
Yeah.
no
Wow.
matter how much crap you go through, how little, how stupid it is,
Yeah.
um, I mean, I love you. And I
Yeah.
literally, that rocked my world and changed my
Mm.
life at the moment.
Yeah.
And I ended up meeting a girl while I was there who was also a counselor. And
Yeah.
we started dating at some point. And I was like, heck yeah, like, I found a girl in Young Life, and this is awesome.
Yeah.
And, but with that, relationship. It went on for like a year, 2 years, and
Mm.
I experienced anxiety and panic attacks for the first time.
Yeah.
And I was actually away at South Clinton on a Capernaum trip.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in the middle of watching one of those skits go on that
Yeah.
they do. And I literally started hyperventilating and freaking out.
Mm.
And her dad was a part of that group.
Yeah.
And I went up to him and I said, I need your help. Like, I'm having a panic attack. Like, I literally had to get up and walk outside.
Yeah.
I was freaking out. I
Yeah.
didn't know what it was, like, so I couldn't diagnose the problem.
Right.
And he was like, it'll be all right. We'll pray for you. So they prayed for me, blah, blah, blah. And go to bed, do my thing. Wake up the next morning, panic attack. Still.
Mm.
It goes on for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was living in an apartment with a guy that I found kind of like off Facebook. Don't recommend that for anybody. Yeah. And he was a Christian guy, but he
Mm.
would go and disappear like months on end.
Wow.
And he would just go to other countries and, be involved with, some little village in like
Yeah.
Africa or whatever. And then
And
he'd
serve
show up in
somewhere.
all these weird African clothes. And I'd be like, where were you at? And he was like, Uganda. And I was like, good to see you, dude.
Cool.
Well, he disappeared yet again another
Mm.
time. And I remember I called this girl and I told her, I need your help.
Mm.
And she basically said, I can't. I'm hanging out with my girlfriends. Figure it out. You're a big boy. And that really ticked me off. And I was
Mm.
like, this isn't what a relationship is. And you calling out for
Yeah.
help. Like, this is what I'm telling myself. So me being me in my past, I lived at the town center and didn't have a car.
Mm.
And I walk across the street, go over to an ABC store, and I buy 2 bottles of cheap vodka, go into my
Mm.
room, turn on a movie. And next thing you notice, I think I probably sat in my room and maybe drank like 8 or 9 handles of vodka
Mm.
for about a week straight. And I think it
Wow.
was like Super Bowl Sunday at this point. She comes over to pick me up. And I mean, I am past white girl wasted. Like, I
Yeah.
am Lieutenant Dan stupid. And I go over to her house
Yeah.
and I'm acting like a fool.
Mm.
Roommates and friends were like, dude, something's up with him.
Yeah.
And I basically was kicked out.
Mm.
And I left, and I didn't want to leave that easily. And I kept trying to explain to her what was going on. But I didn't want to tell her that I was drinking alcohol by myself because
Right.
that was embarrassing. And
Right.
I didn't want to tell people that I was an
Yeah.
alcoholic. I didn't want to accept the fact that I was an alcoholic
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And so she basically, in a nutshell, listened to her friends, and her friends basically said, do not answer his phone calls, do not text him back, do
Mm.
not do this. And when you're intoxicated and that happens, it's one of those things that just doesn't sit well.
Yeah.
So I started to walk home, and as I was walking, I was like, you know what, I'm going to get her attention. So I texted her and said, what if I step into traffic? Are you not going to
Mm.
talk to me? And when I wrote that, of course, I turned around and walked back to her apartment. 2 police officers show up, throw me in handcuffs,
Mm.
and grab my phone, go through my phone, read the text messages, and
Yeah.
I get Baker acted
Yeah.
and get put in the hospital.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with Baker
Yeah.
acting. So, first thing I do is I call my best friend at the moment, and I tell him what's going on. And then I'm like, I don't know who I'm going to call. I don't know
Mm.
anybody. And I really don't have any close friends. And all the friends that I did have were the ones that I partied with.
Yeah.
And, and they're not going to be my saving grace.
Mm.
So I called my sister and I said, look, don't tell mom and dad I've been Baker acted. Explain that to her. She doesn't know what that is. So she's like, that's fine. I said, just don't tell mom and dad. She's like, I
Mm.
got you. Next thing you notice, dad shows up.
Yeah.
So, and I ruined one of his favorite trips. that he was on. And Dad shows up, picks me up, we leave. And I told Dad for the first time I might have a problem with alcohol. And as I said too, might. So I start going to AA meetings. The girl I was dating broke up with me. Of course, I start going to AA meetings trying to revive that relationship. Didn't work out.
Right.
And at this point, I get involved with AA. I get involved with all these people, solid group, meet all these great people, and get a sponsor. And as I'm going through it and doing the step work, I started telling my sponsor, I was like, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. I keep questioning that. And he was like, if you're here, you might have a problem. If you think that you have a problem, you might have a problem.
Right.
And he was very gentle about it at first. And we finally met up again and to do step work. And I raised the question again. And he flat out looked at me and he said, okay, I'm going to make a bet with you. And I was like, all right, cool. Tell me. He was like, I want you to go to the beach bars tonight and go directly to the bar and try and have 2 beers. He goes, if you want to have a mixed drink, go have 2 mixed drinks and then go home.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I was like, no, I don't want to go to the bar. Like, I don't want to go drink. Like, that's everything against this. I'm just saying, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. And he was like, let me tell you how this is going to go. You're going to go to the bar. You're going to have 2 drinks. It's going to end up being a shot after that. It's going to be another beer. And then you're going to meet some girl. And then, that might not work out. So you might go to a strip club. Then you might start doing cocaine. And I was like, whoa. I don't like strip clubs.
Yeah.
I've never even done cocaine. Like, that's your story, dude.
Right.
So when he said all this, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm done with you. We're not doing this anymore. So, yeah, I'm out. So I told myself, I'm just not going to drink anymore. And I started going to the bars, DD for all my friends.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, slowly started drinking again.
Yeah.
And it just progressively got worse and worse and worse. And at this point, I had a motorcycle. I went to a party one night. Woke up the next morning, still intoxicated, didn't even realize that I was still drinking. And I was driving home from the bars, or driving home from a friend's house, and I accelerated into a turn going about 60 miles an hour on a crotch rocket. And I flipped that crotch rocket, hit a curb, threw me into oncoming traffic. I was wearing blue jeans, flip-flops, and a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I got up, picked my bike up, tried to start it, wouldn't work. I wrecked right there off of San Jose Boulevard.
Yeah.
By the Publix. I think there's like a Mexican restaurant right there. And I walked over to the Mexican restaurant, bloody asphalt in my skin, and sat down at the bar. And they were like, dude, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm waiting on a friend to pick me up and get to the hospital. And call a friend. He picks me up, takes me to the hospital. And I get there, and this lady gets mad. And she's like, you're on drugs. You're drunk. You're this, you're that. I was like, no, I'm not. And she tells my mom. And my mom gets mad and she leaves. And I was like, what in the world? Like, you're the worst woman in the world. Well, she was saying that because I didn't call an ambulance. And in Florida, if you get into an accident, they are allowed to draw blood and figure out what's in your system.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't getting a DUI. So I called a friend of mine's mom who worked at the ER, told her what was going on. She came down, helped me out, got me out of there. And my mom came and picked me up. And at this point, my life was so in shambles. I didn't know what I was going to do for work. I didn't know what I was going to do for anything. So I started coming up with all these brand new, bright ideas of what I could possibly do. And I sweet talked my aunt and uncle into allowing me to move to North Carolina and living with them and finding a job. and figuring I could get involved with Young Life there
Yeah.
because I found a group of people that I loved that was from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where my aunt and uncle lived.
Yeah.
And when I moved there, I had no friends. I had no life. I worked at a car dealership, and all I did was go to work, come home, and drink liquor out of a bottle.
Mm.
And I knew I was an alcoholic at that point.
Yeah.
I just kept always finding comfort, like that was how I was going to find friends.
Yeah.
People would always talk about going out to bars, drinking, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll go.
Yeah.
But never could hold any friendships because I was always the one getting drunk and acting like an idiot.
Mm.
And
what is your relationship with God like at this point? Because, you keep turning towards wanting to be involved in something like Young Life, which is championing, like, let's teach the relationship of God to kids, and like, you can tell that you want this. And obviously, like, our mom's best friends, prayer partners, all of that. And you and I lived a similar life in the sense that I always knew my mom was praying, or was like a few times. I remember telling her, like, it's 11 a.m. I don't need another biblical lesson. Because it was just constant, which is a great thing. Sometimes, like you are saying, it can feel like pressure. Like, I don't want to make a mistake, or how do I live up to this, or how do I figure it out on my own? But it kind of sounds like still you're seeking something in like Young Life where you have that connection to God. So what does that look like for you in the midst of all
like
this?
you said, our moms were huge prayer warriors.
Yeah.
As I call them, holy rollers. So, I mean, it was just like, Mom, same thing. I can't listen to another Bible verse at 11 a.m. like I'm not even. I just figured God would grab my life somehow, some way or another. I don't know how in the world it will work out, but I figure if I'm at one of these places like this or that, like, you're just going to rattle my cage, wake me up, shake me, touch me, whatever. And I've heard the stories. And I just figured it was going to happen. It was going to happen. It was going to happen. And let's make a mental note of this. I was doing it my way the whole time. And I thought that in my own way, I would figure it out some way. I would figure this out.
Yeah.
And it would just happen. And long story short, it never did.
Yeah.
And so the more it never did happen the way that I wanted it to work, the more distant, the more pissed I got at God. I always chased this idea that God would just radically change me. And I figured it would be at Young Life, or it would be at some whatever thing that I was doing, Christian involved.
Right.
And it just didn't work out. And so anyway, I kind of gave up on it, and I kind of quit on it, and I was like, screw it. And especially when I got to Winston-Salem, I never hung out with any of the people from Young Life.
Wow. I am so grateful for Mac's honesty and commitment to sharing the darkest days of his life so that others can find the light. I learned so much about his struggles, yes, with substances, but ultimately the struggles with identity and lies of the enemy that led him to cope. I love when Mac shared that story at Capernaum, that God was telling him, all I want to do is love you. I see so many details of God's faithfulness to Mac and his family, even when the circumstances looked like they would never change. Please make sure you come back on Tuesday for part 2 of this conversation. Mac shares more details of the grip of alcoholism on his life that ultimately led him to surrender. But his story of finding God more deeply through AA and now using his creativity to own his own business is the next part of this story that you do not want to miss. I'm reminded of John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I hope this episode and this podcast as a whole serves as a light in the darkness. In the midst of the messy and downright heartbreaking areas of our life, Jesus' redemptive light always shines through. I'd love if you shared this episode with someone you think that could really connect with Mac's story. Please be sure to share the show and follow the show on Instagram and leave any comments there or in the Spotify Q&A box for me and for Mac. I'd really love to connect. I'll see you back here on Tuesday for part 2 of Mac's story. Enjoy your weekend, friends.